So our topic today, we are continuing with our OEM-specific training, and this week's make is Hyundai and Kia. Hyundai and Kia are very much intertwined at this point. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but they share a lot of components. So talk about one, we're pretty much talking about the other, so we combine them both into this one course. So let's start with the history. So Hyundai, as a company, was founded by Chung Ju-young in 1947 as Hyundai Engineering and Construction Company. Now, I think if you been paying attention to some of these Asian makes that we've been going through here, you'll notice that a lot of them kind of started as an industrial, engineering, construction, that sort of thing, and they still do. I mean, you can see drive down the road, you might see a Hyundai excavator out on a job site, right? So they make other things, and just automotive ends up coming later, right? So Hyundai Motors, the automotive part, was established in 1967, so 20 years later. The first vehicle they sold was the Cortina, and that was made in conjunction with Ford, so Ford helped them out on that one. Their first original model from Hyundai itself was the Pony in 1975, it's pictured down there on the bottom. And then the first U.S. model was the Excel in 1986. I remember those little things running around. They were little like hatchbacks, kind of like a little smaller version of that Pony, I think. Kind of what they look like, right? I remember those. Now, in 1998, the company wanted to become a world-class brand. They had this drive that they wanted to become one of the top automotive brands in the world, right? So also in 1998, maybe to coincide with that, not really sure, but in 1998 as well, Hyundai purchased 51% of Kia Motors, so that means they own the majority shares of Kia, so that means they are kind of one and the same. In 1999, they introduced the 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty, which they still have to this day, and that probably didn't hurt matters when it came to sales. In 2011, they became the world's fourth largest automaker behind GM, Volkswagen, and Toyota. So there we are, back up to 2011, and they were up there as a world-class brand. They spun off their Genesis model to its own brand in 2015. So prior to that, you had the Hyundai Genesis was the car, and that was their top-of-the-line model, leather and all that good stuff, all the bells and whistles. But they decided to spin that off into its own brand to compete with, say, Mercedes, BMW, such as that. Launched with the G80 and the G90 in 2017. So I remember being in Dallas, as we have a training center at the Hilton outside the airport there. And we were there one week doing a training, and Genesis was there too, rolling out their brand to like all their dealers network. So they had both of their cars there, plus they like BMW, Mercedes there, a couple other ones, a couple other luxury cars, probably a Lexus, I'd imagine. And they were doing like ride and drives, right? So let's compare how our car stacks up to the competition. So that's who they were kind of going after, was the BMWs and the Mercedes and the Lexuses. Never personally driven one of those, so not really sure how it would compare, but they look pretty nice on the outside. So maybe they are that competitor to them. Let's talk about top models now. So based on sales volumes, of course, as we always do, this is from the last 10 years or so, 2013 to 2023 model year sales data. Number one overall by quite the margin is the Sonata. And then next followed by the Santa Fe, and then the Soul, our first Kia on the list. But then we see the Forte, the Altima, the Sportage, and the Telluride, and those are all Kias as well. So it looks like overall, over this 10-year span, Kia's selling a bit better than the Hyundai brand at that point. I remember when Kia used to be like the entry-level brand of theirs. So seeing a lot of those on the list must mean that, a lot of people are buying them. So especially like the SUVs like the Sportage and the Telluride, right? So these top three are the ones we're going to pick for our representative models. The high water mark for the Sonata was 2014 during that time. So by this time was the 6th generation. The Sonata was launched in 85, I believe it was. 6th generation, 2-liter and 2.4-liter GDI engines available. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. 2.4-liter hybrid was also available, and it was available with a 6-speed automatic or 6-speed manual transmission. Kind of nice to be able to still find a manual transmission, even though it was 10 years. And it was the last year of this generation. They went through a redesign in 2015. Actually, 2015 in North America. Over in Asia and what have you, it was 2014 was actually the new model for that. So we actually got it over here a year later. So that means it was the last of that generation. 2016 Santa Fe was the high mark for that. It was the third generation of the Santa Fe at that time. The 3.3-liter GDI engine was the only engine available in the United States, but there was a 2-liter turbo engine available in Canada. 6-speed automatic or manual transmissions. Once again, that same 6-speed automatic or 6-speed manual. Also available in what they call an XL version of a longer wheelbase. So they had the Sport, which is the shorter wheelbase, the Santa Fe, which is the regular wheelbase, I guess, and then the XL, which was the longer wheelbase. And then once again, going back to that, they're kind of one and the same. It was sold by Kia, badged as a Sorento. So the Sorento is based on that same platform. And then we have the 2015 Soul, the little hamster box, right? Remember, if you remember those commercials when they first came out, they had the hamsters driving it down the road. Second generation of the Soul at that point. It was available with 1.6-liter or that 2-liter GDI engine we talked about previously in the Sonata, and a 6-speed automatic or manual transmission was available on that as well. Not a lot of options when it comes to transmissions. It's either this one or that one. You get an automatic or a manual, and they're both 6-speed, right? And that's pretty much across the board. That makes it a little efficient. So let's talk common issues. Common issues that we will find are misfire issues for sure, just like a lot of other vehicles. That does show up kind of top of the list and when we look at the repairs. Knock sensor issues. Now, when we get to the codes, we'll see that. But when we go a little further into the presentation, we'll see that it might not necessarily be the knock sensor that's actually causing that issue. And then some engine bearing issues there too, which may or may not be related. Let's talk about some common codes. This is based on scan tool data. You know, what codes are coming up on the scan tool. So as I said, 4 of the top 6 codes coming out of the scan tool are knock sensor signal. Mostly on the 2.4s, actually all on the 2.4s. Also cam position actuator circuits, so P0010. And then cat code down here, cylinder 3, cylinder 4 misfire. And this is interesting, a alternator code. And that's number 9 out of the top 10 codes on Hyundai and Kia. So I thought that was kind of interesting with that. But you see the same kind of thing across the board on both. And of course, the Hyundai Sonata was the number 1 car. So that all of this kind of works out the way you would expect it to work out, just kind of looking at it at a high level, right? The further we dig, seems like the data is directing us to exactly what it is. Some OEM-specific features, and as a brand, I guess, they don't have a lot of bells and whistles. You don't have a lot of fancy stuff. I mean, I did have a rental Hyundai a couple months ago, like a month ago, and that sure had a lot of cameras on it and a lot of screens. Like you turn the left turn signal on, and the left camera turns on in your dashboard. But same thing with the right side. It's kind of distracting, honestly. But as far as things that make them unique when it comes to diagnostics, not really a lot. What I did think was kind of unique about them, though, was that they were an early adopter of the modern GDI engines. You really didn't see a lot of GDI engines out in the wild, at least on more affordable cars, right? So they introduced a 2.4-liter Theta 2 engine in November 2009. So that was their first kind of getting into it. Borrowed the technology from Mitsubishi, who actually used that technology starting in '96. And they actually trademarked the term GDI in 2001. So this was borrowed from another manufacturer there. But they've used GDI engines right along ever since then, right? So that's that engine. And that's kind of a little unique. I mean, everybody nowadays pretty much has GDI engines, but back then that was not that common. You still had multi-port fuel injection back then, not so much the direct injection. All right, let's get from a couple tips from a tech now. So this is related to that knock sensor code that I talked about this first. So it's a P1326 code, which we saw was 4 of the top 6 codes on there were this knock sensor code. It applies to many of the 2 liters and the 2.4-liter engines from 2011 to 2019 model years, and we can see some of them up here. So 2011 to 14 Sonata, 15 to 19 Sonata, 13 to 18 Santa Fe Sport, Santa Fe Tucson, Veloster. All right, so all of those. And applicable vehicles with 2-liter TDG GDI and 2.4-liter GDI engines may experience a check engine warning lamp illuminated with this code, and or engine may exhibit abnormal noise or no crank, no start condition. Follow the procedure to inspect the vehicle and replace the engine or update the engine ECU software based on the inspection results. So if you go through all this and you go through the testing, pretty much it's just the engines would fail. Bearing issues, like I said, there's bearing issues are very common. So the lower end would the bearing have bearing, you'd have some rod knock, and the knock sensor would think it's knocking when really it's knocking, but it's not that kind of knocking. So it would throw a code because it was out of range, but really it was just the bottom end was knocking. So they bring you through all the stuff, drain the oil, and check for this and check for that and check for that. So that's fairly common because that's one of their fairly common engines there on some of their more common models. So that is definitely something to look out for. And if you go through the list of the flow chart, it seems like the least likely thing that you would replace in that case is going to be the knock sensor. Right. So we will see that people just maybe tend to replace the knock sensor just because that's the code, but it ends up either being a reflash or an engine or maybe a knock sensor in more rare cases. Bad knock sensor. So something to look out for because that's apparently pretty common. This I also thought was kind of interesting, and this could be something you perhaps run into out in the wild, and I thought it was just kind of interesting and out of the ordinary. So this is a service action for the front outer door handle, a software update for the door handle. Because I guess something with the capacitive touch function doesn't work quite right. It's supposed to, unlock the vehicle when you touch the handle as long as the fob's in range. But it doesn't quite work correctly, 23 and 24 Tellurides. So there's actually a special programming device that you need to use for it too. You can't just use a regular pass-through for this. You have to physically remove the handle from the vehicle and then plug all this stuff in and then use it to flash the handle. So I thought that was kind of involved for kind of something you wouldn't normally think of that you had to do, is reflash the door handle, right? So you never know. Some wild things can happen, especially with the way technology is with vehicles now. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting one. All right, now let's talk about some OEM-specific scan tool functions. Engine-related tests, you're going to see things like the GDI fuel leak test, which, for example, as we said, GDI is a very common engine that they use now. So there's a fuel leak test for that to check for leaks. Cylinder power balance test, so that's good for checking misfires. Maybe even could be related to that knock sensor thing where you might have a misfire due to that. And then PCM lock setting, that's to get it out of a service mode when you replace it. Transmission related, like we said, a couple different transmission options across the board there. So there's an AT adaptation mode, so that helps the learning process for the oil pressure adaptation of the automatic transaxle. Perform this function if you replace the TCU, the automatic transmission assembly itself, or resetting the values themselves. It's a relearn it after you reset the value. And then some other tests, for example, motor-driven power steering tests. So they were pretty common now to have electronic power steering, but I think back maybe 2014, what we're showing here on the Sonata, maybe not quite as common as well. So there's just another thing that they kind of did. So there's a test for that to test the electronic power steering system. Let's go live on the tool and see what we can see. Let's check something here real quick. All right. So let's pull up our Sonata first. Okay, going to come in here and we'll just look at engine real quick. Oh, another thing that's kind of unique too that I forgot to mention is just like we've talked about with Toyota and other manufacturers before, freeze frame data in the OEM specific side of the computer here. So I can just pop into freeze frame, I can hit that, and it'll give me the freeze frame data for that code, so I don't have to go into OBD2 to find it. Functional tests, we have engine off and engine running tests. Since I'm in a simulator, I can't show that because it actually queries the vehicle. And then system tests over here. So things like resetting adaptives, VIN read and write, cylinder power balance, mentioned that before. Cylinder balance test mode is activated, automatically collects the speed of the crankshaft for 30 seconds and calculates each cylinder's average speed and displays that a low reading can be caused by compression, fuel, spark insert. So you'd go in there and then it's going to crank it. So it needs to be over at 0 RPM, et cetera, et cetera. Since I can't meet those criteria, it won't let me continue, but you would normally need to go through and meet those criteria. It's an EVAP monitor test as well, automated test. This is a GDI fuel leak test we talked about. So it's only supported on some versions of the Theta 2 GDI engines. Use the functional check of the GDI fuel system and leakage check. So we need to meet all these criteria, and then we could continue. And then it would go and do an actual leak down test on the system. Once again, simulator can't go any further. All right, and then transmission as well. System tests. So there's an adaptation mode, puts it in the adaptation mode. After I need to, if I clear some adaptations, so I can go in here and I can reset them, right? And then I would need to go in and functions resetting adaptive values to the auto transmission assembly when replacing it. Or transaxle, I guess that could be too. And then all the way down here, we also have the power steering. And then there's that motor-driven power steering testing. All right, let's go to SureTrack information, find some of that. See what's available. All right, so if we look for common components, pads, rotors, wheels, by the way, 614,000 repair records on these. Like I said, very popular vehicle. Wheels, battery, starter, that seems kind of high. Tie rod end, that seems a little high too. Cylinder 4 misfire, cylinder 3 misfire, cam positions, fuel rail, system pressure there. P1326, that is that knock sensor we talked about, right? And that gets shown up way over there. That's pretty high on the user-generated lookups. But down here, number 10, on the repair order data, and if I go in there, we'll see that TSB. So there's that inspection and replacement. May experience to check engine light. Need a few things. We need something to measure how much oil we drain out of it when we would do that. Bearing clearance tester, because we need to check the bearings. Special wrench, which I think is interesting. It is they do specify a snap-on wrench in order to do this. Thought that's kind of interesting. Let's see. For oil maintenance. Service flow chart. Right, so there's different flow charts you'd have to go through. If it's not C's, we go to flow chart B. We go and take a look at the engine, take a look at the oils. It's oil on the dipstick. Whether or not it leaves a flash, then we go to B. Will it turn? Yes. Go to flow chart A again. Go to flow chart A. Select both hoses at a clearance tool and go through and check your clearance test. Does it pass or not? Passes. Does it have no engine noise? No. Is there an update available? No. Then replace the knock sensor. Otherwise, update the engine ECM. So they make you go through a lot of checks to check and see if it needs an engine, because that's the most likely scenario. Otherwise, is there an ECU update? They will do that. And then whether or not you need to actually replace the knock sensor. So the knock sensor is pretty low down the chain by the time I get to that. That's the things to do. Now, if we look at the top repairs for that, though, replace the knock sensor is number 1. Now, some of that could be due to people just seeing a knock sensor code and just replacing the knock sensor. Fair enough. Plenty of people might do that, but there is a bulletin on it, and you'd want to. I would advise you to check that first. Reprogram powertrain control modules in there and replace engine assemblies in there as well. So, all possibilities on that vehicle. All right, let's look at our Santa Fe. Okay, this is a different engine. This is a 3.3 on this one, but you're going to see pretty much the same stuff. So we got freeze frame. You're going to system tests. There's actually fewer tests, but there's that PCM lock setting. So the PCM attached on the vehicle is set to lock before being delivered to the customer. This is done to not allow the changing of the data programs on the PCM without any permission from the manufacturer. After replacing the PCM in the workshop, the test will only run once on a new PCM. Test will fail on all PCMs whose MEC has already been set to on. So you need to see whether it's on or off. You continue. It's going to give you a PID. You continue, and it does a reset for it. That's after it's if you replace the PCM. Now this is just going to get stuck here, so I got to back out of the car and go back in. Up in here. Okay. Okay. So engine, VIN read and write, evap monitor test again. Occupant detection system, that's kind of important too. System tests is a PODS reset, what they call it. So that's the occupant detection system, passive occupancy detection system. And what it does is it resets it to 0, basically. You set make sure the passenger seat is fully empty, and you put the back all the way forward and the bottom all the way back, and then it resets it back to 0. And then anytime you remove the seat, do any seat work on it, you need to do that reset as well. That's not necessarily unique, but it is something that's there. Now we'll look at SureTrack information. So 76,959 repairs. We see pads and rotors. That's common. AC refrigerant, number 4. AC refrigerant line, number 6. High rod end, number 7. That seems a little odd. AC and up, number 1 thing. Anything on over there? No, nothing on AC over there. evap, post catalyst fuel trim. So oftentimes it can be related to oxygen sensors on those. Cam positions, crank position, bunch of misfires, evap again. This one doesn't have that NOx sensor code in there because it doesn't really have that NOx sensor problem. Just because. So let's see. Yeah, so overall, and then we have our symptoms here. AC and up, like I said, engine doesn't start, noise heard from brakes. Not a lot of issues. So fairly straightforward on that one. And then we'll pull our Kia. And since they use very similar engine, and this one, it's the 1.6, I believe, is the one I pulled up. It's going to be very similar. VIN read write, resetting adaptives, evap monitor tests. A lot of similar functions on there. Freeze frame built in. Transmission is going to be the same. Occupant detection is going to be the same. You got electronic power steering. That's going to be the same. So like I said, a lot of similar components on it are available. SureTrack. At first, the first time I went in here today to look this stuff up before class, I was like, oh, is that like an error on the website? No, I forgot that their trim levels or what have you are an exclamation mark or a plus. So we'll just go with the exclamation mark there. Use this vehicle. And you see 86,173 repairs on that one. Pads and rotors, battery, ignition coil, catalytic converter. That seems awfully high. Misfire. A lot of misfires on these. Evap. There's that 1326 again on this 2-liter engine. That's going to give you that same information. Crank position sensor, catalyst efficiency. A lot of fairly common stuff. We see a PO420. That's cat code 2, right? Noise heard from brakes. Engine doesn't start. Engine runs rough. So a lot of that has to do with your misfires as well. So by and large, nothing really jumps out on this one. That Santa Fe was pretty, the AC, that was interesting that jumped out so far. But as far as the Soul, seems like it's fairly straightforward on that. So that is Kia. Hopefully you learned a few little tidbits on this, and I see I do have a couple questions. I'll get to those in a second. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about Thursday. Because we have another class Thursday this week because software is out. Software is coming out. If you have software subscription that is active and you're hooked up to the internet and your tool is able to update over the internet, then you may already have it. I saw a couple people post screenshots off their Zeus, Solus Plus, Apollo Plus, Apollo D9, Triton D10. Those all should have over-the-air update capability as well. So you may have it available now. And then starting next week, franchisees will have it installed on their truck, and you can get it that way if you need it that way. But we're going to start talking about it on Thursday. So Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. It's going to be streaming to YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics, you'll be able to watch it there. The Zoom link went out in an email. So if we have your email address and you're on the email list, then you would have gotten it there. Otherwise, I don't have it with me available right now, but because it is a different sign-up link than the Zoom link we're on right now. But we will be broadcasting on YouTube as well. So go check out the YouTube channel. And then next Tuesday, as always, we have another class. All new classes continuing. So TPMS testing and repair. And some developments have happened in TPMS since the last time we talked about it a couple years ago. So I made some updates to the presentation and we got some new stuff in there. So we're going to talk about that. Same time as always, 6 and 9 Eastern. Go to snapon.com/OT if you want to watch on Zoom. Otherwise, you go to YouTube for the 6 p.m. class. That's youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics. Make sure you like and subscribe over there. Or the 9 p.m. class, like I'm doing right now, goes live to my Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/SnapOnJason. All one word, no dash in the Snap-on. If you want to see any of the other classes in this series, this is class number 96, but we have 95 other ones up on the YouTube as well. Anything from ADAS to modern ignition system testing and everything in between. So if you want to go check that out, you can scan that QR code right there, and it'll bring you directly to the page and subscribe you automatically. Otherwise, you can just go to youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics. There is a playlist for live training. You can go in there and watch it. They're all about 30 minutes, 40 minutes long, depending on, kind of questions and the material and stuff. But, take one over lunch, read one over lunch, right? Or watch one over lunch, should I say. Also, I mentioned your email address earlier. So you may or may not have your email address. If you didn't give it to your franchisee when you activated your scan tool, or they don't have it, we probably don't have it either. So if you want to start getting these communications, emails, technical focus articles, SureTrack logs, quick tips, new product releases, if any, they usually send out my training schedule a couple times a quarter. So definitely worth your while because it's all value added content. We're not going to spam you with a bunch of sales emails and stuff like that. It's maybe once a week, maybe twice if there's really something going on. But that's where you would have found the link to register for that software seminar as well. So here's an example of one of those technical focus articles on timing chains and stretch timing chains and how to diagnose it, right? So that is the type of stuff you could get if you just click on that QR code and fill out the form. All right, time for questions. If you do have any questions, as I said, this is a pre-recorded session this week. So on Zoom, just reply to the confirmation email if you're watching on Zoom. Otherwise, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can leave a comment and I'll get to those when I return. Also want to make mention of my buddy Keith, who also does free diagnostic training on Wednesdays and Thursdays. He does scanner-specific training. So it is one session a night, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Pacific. The first hour or so is let's set up your tools, make sure your Wi-Fi is all set up. We'll talk about Security Link. We'll talk about Snap-on Cloud. And then he goes through code to completion on Fast Track Intelligent Diagnostics on the corresponding tool. Then he takes about a 5-minute break. And then the next 45 minutes or so spends time with the lab scope, got to component test that aspect of the tool. So it's about an hour and 45 minutes all told. Definitely check it out. He's been with us for over 30 years. He has a vast well of Snap-on knowledge. And check that out if you want more information about your tool. All right. And with that, hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a nice night and take care.